Suzy, thank you so much for joining me. I want to start by introducing you. Suzy Soulshine is a trained drum and rhythm facilitator. She uses an evidence-based program called HealthRhythms to help people relax, connect, re-energize, and heal. Suzy also facilitates monthly drum circles to connect people to community and the healing power of rhythm. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to get to hear about you, what you do, share that with everyone, and hear about this healing power.
I'm excited to have a space to talk about it because it's my passion.
Yes. Where should we start? Should we go back to how you found it, or should we with what it?
Well, I guess if we start at the beginning of why it became important to me to pursue this particular path of drumming, because drumming certainly takes many forms in our culture and in cultures around the world. So I guess maybe just starting at the foundational story of how it became rhythm as my tool for healing, as opposed to anything else. Does that make sense?
Sounds perfect.
So I started playing the drums probably about 15 years ago as just a recreation thing I felt like doing. I had played as a kid and growing up. I always played an instrument. I was just really missing having that collaborative process that you can only really get from music, particularly if you have a musical background. And so I had the opportunity to take a West African drum class. This when my son was really small. And I went to the class, instantly fell in love, and went on to drum with this same group of women for the next about 8 years. And what was unique to the beginning of my journey became evident to me as I was going into a very unexpected time. When I reflected later, it occurred to me that the one thing that didn't change in my life was my drumming. The drumming brought me back week after week, and I continued to drum with this group. I continued to learn. I continued to find joy from it, and I continued to grow as a drummer. And around that time, I had only been drumming maybe about 2 or 3 years, and my marriage started to fall apart. It became evident to me that I was living inside of a very abusive relationship, which was a pretty hard pill to swallow initially. Kind of thinking, well, this doesn't happen to people like me. This couldn't be happening. It's all in my head. Whatever. The stories we tell ourselves. So through the support of some friends and family, when I began to talk about what was going on in my life, it became clear that that's what the situation was. And so I slowly took steps to extract myself from the relationship, and of course my child as well. And I still marvel at the fact that I made it to my drum lessons. And when I think about, kind of shockingly, I remember having these arguments, partner and my husband at the time, where I would say, I'm going to this, and I would risk it all to get there, and I would take my son with me sometimes. And so it became clear in retrospect that there was something else going on here. This wasn't just about drumming.
What kept you going back? Returning time after time?
Well, I think at the very foundational level, it felt good. It felt good in my body. I felt relaxed there. I could laugh. I could forget about everything else, remarkably, that was going on outside my life. And it was a group of women, and it wasn't specifically a women's drum club, but it kind of fleshed out that way, where it was mostly women. And I was at an age where, new to motherhood and somewhat isolated because I was new also to Austin. And so it was these women who were mostly older than me with just such varied stories. We didn't sit around and chat, but the stories would come through as we played together, little anecdotes here and there. And I started to kind of pick up on it felt encouraging to know that other people had gone through difficult times and came out the other side. And the tool that really facilitated that connection was, of course, at the time, I was just happy to be there. And I felt like a little kid, I'd be listening to, and my overachiever nature when I try a new skill is I want to be as good as I can, I was in it. I really wanted to do well with it. So I think that's really what kept me coming back, and encouragement. My drum teacher, she was very vocal. You have some natural ability. And she started to use me kind of as her little example, and of course that just made my little nerd self so happy to be the teacher's helper, But it was also lifting me up in ways that I wasn't getting in other areas of my life. And so intrinsically, my body knew that I needed it. It was medicine.
I know that we're going to get into the science of rhythm and connection. How you've later learned what was going on for you in your brain in that time. But I love this, it felt good.
Yeah.
And I think we could just leave it at that.
Right. The end.
And let people, it feels good, and you could feel that too.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I started to think about, well, what else was I doing in my life that also felt good, and this kind of not only felt good, but then once I was able to get out of that relationship and move into the next chapter of my life, the drumming continued, but then I had all these new challenges. And I was just thinking about this last night, actually. I was thinking about how, because now we're living in this bizarro world without, getting too everyone that I talk to, we're all looking to kind of level out the central nervous system, like this kind of friendly. And so I was thinking what I was feeling during that time. And because I was doing so much drumming, it helped my brain in such a way that I was able, of course, this is in retrospect after I've learned more about it, but really get those tasks done very methodically that I needed to do in order to survive, finding a place to live, finding some help for my son, finding a support system, that kind of stuff, which when I think about it in retrospect, how the heck did I and keep my sanity? And I really do believe that having this community of people to connect with really.
So you found it through it was a music-oriented group, right?
Yeah, it was actually a group called the Austin Holistic Mothers, and we used to try to find different activities for us to engage in as a group. This one just struck me because it was the ancient history of the drum was something that I'd always been fascinated by. I had banged on drums before, but I really wanted to understand how to play it correctly and learn history.
So when did the shift come from learning drumming, and having all these positive side effects that you were just benefiting? A shift from that. This is thinking and your own recognition of that, and the recognition of, and I can provide it for others.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And I'm glad it's been a few years since this hit me, because had you asked me that question a few years ago, I wouldn't have really been able to answer it, because I've done a lot of searching to figure out why I keep getting drawn back. But so Soulshine Rhythm Experience, we are going into our 5th year. So that's when that community was kicked off. So I will say probably just before that, I started to have ache again to make music. And I should preface that by saying I moved physically, geographically, from the area where I was doing this participation. I had to leave Austin because I couldn't afford it. And so I moved up north, and a couple of years went by where I wasn't making music with them. And one day it just hit me. And I was like, gosh, I miss it. And I saw my drum in the corner, and I hadn't played it with anybody other than myself in too long. And I decided, you know what, this is going to be the year that I'm bringing music back into my life. I'm going to start going to see more shows. And of course, it was on the heels of a particularly interesting chapter. And so I stuck with that tonight, and I went out to support my friends' bands and really started to get more involved, just seeing music and filling my spirit. And then I connected with some drummers, and then I decided, I'm going to start my own drum circle, because I lived in Cedar Park at this point, didn't know anybody. And so I kicked off the community drum circle. And leading up to that part, and I'm sure many folks can relate to this, you have those moments where you just have this clarity and these like random acts. Like I look back and I'm like, why did I think that would work? But something did. And to call it divine, call it your spirit awakening, whatever you want to attribute it to. But that's what I did. And during that time, I started facilitation, drum circle facilitation. What does that mean? Because I took it seriously. I thought I had been to facilitated events before for fun, where a drum circle facilitator stands up and kind of engages the group, because it's usually non-musicians, non-performers, and he's able to get it into this cohesive music-making unit. And it could be hundreds of people, and suddenly we're all in trains together. So to me, I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this properly. I want to, pay homage to I had a tremendous amount of respect for that skill. And so as I started diving into it, I started reading about the therapeutic benefits. And then I started seeing all this list of things that they were talking about me. They were talking about what I had experienced. And then I just dove into that rabbit hole, and I thought, how I want to get my hands on as many tools as I can to really bring this community together, to really connect it, the intention of building community and using drumming to do that. So it kind of morphed from a selfish motive of, I want to drum, into, I want to connect with people. I want to connect with my community. And how can I do that with what I have to bring to the table?
I love how one of the inherent pieces to this is community, and it's connect. This isn't something that is a solo. I imagine it can. Mm-hmm. Drum circles. It's the circle.
Yeah.
And so in you finding what you needed for yourself, it just automatically meant that you were building.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I like how you're making me think about it in different ways. But yeah, that's.
And dive into a little bit of the science. You've done this trainings and you've done all this. What is it that's going that healing is for someone who's exercising rhythm?
Yeah. Well, I think to thoroughly answer that question, it's important to go all the way back. And when you look at drumming from a historical perspective, and we're talking ancient civilization, if you explore every culture that existed on the planet, you will find drumming in one form or another. And you will find music, and you will find movement. And these three things together have this amazing synergistic effect when it comes to not only creating community, but giving a platform for telling stories, for the history of the community, and a place for people to gather and to unify. And when we look, it's like the backbone of music, right? So that is the spot where it's and I think what tends to come into the therapeutic, it creates a common ground. So even now, you go out to a dance club, and that thumping rhythmic vibe that gets everybody connected on the dance floor. You go back 10,000 of years, and you see that same level of connection happening. And so it also speaks a lot to our individual cultures, right? So you take anybody's background, you go far enough back, you're going to find drumming and music and folk dance and all of that. It's a avenue for telling our stories, and we all have one. So I think it affects us on such a deep level into that release of dopamine, the joy hormone that gives us that I just feel so good, I just feel so free. And I challenge you to find anybody who can listen to their favorite song and not start tapping their foot or not start physically moving in some way, right? And that's one thing when we talk about the universal language. We talk about the universal rhythm, which is the heartbeat, which is the very first sound that we all heard. And that is, like the universal birthright is the heartbeat. It's the one thing all of humanity has in common, that we spent that time in the womb hearing our mother's heartbeat as the first sound. So to me, it seems pretty natural that rhythm in our blood, literally. So kind of got a little off topic there in terms of answering your question. As far as the therapeutic benefits go, we can touch on that now if you just want an overview with that.
You mentioned the synergistic effect. What were those?
Well, there's a social element that happens, right? So There is the physical element, so the moving of the movement of the dance, the movement of the literally playing. And then we've got our cognitive space, so what's going on. And the fourth, which is the creative, where perfect platform for when we talk about dance and movement. And one of the things that we've seen happen, and this is unfortunate, and this is why I feel so just honored to do the type of work I do, if we want to call it work, but is to strip away those notions of not being good enough, right? So one of the things that has developed as society has advanced and evolved is the performance aspect, right? And the ego gets in the way of us connecting with the rhythm. As we get older, and you see with children, they get on the dance floor, you put music on anywhere. They're dancing in the supermarket. They don't care.
Mm-hmm.
They're not thinking about if they look cool. They're not thinking about if they're on the beat. They are just feeling it and they're letting loose. And it's beautiful, right? And I don't know about you, but I've seen some adults do that too. I've seen some folks who, just they let go. And for some other people who are watching that, it might make them feel uncomfortable. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that they aren't able to do that as well for whatever blockages they have, right? Where the magic happens for me is when I see somebody that's able to just let it go and feel that rhythm. And so utilizing the drum in this process to tap into letting go of the ego, letting go of judgments, letting go about what people are going to think of whether we're doing it correctly. And you don't need any training whatsoever to move your body to a rhythm. You don't. Your birthright to be able to react physically to what in the rhythm. When I think about synergy.
Music, drum, movement, dance. It sounds like you're saying that for thousands that it's been the natural and automatic way of connecting, and somehow we lost it in some places. In recent times, we also have blocks. There's blocks between us and imagining ourselves getting into the.
Yes, I would say that that's accurate from a perspective. Music as medicine, music as connection, music as healing. Right? We all have songs that we love. We all have music that moves us. And I think the piece that can be missing in order to get the full synergistic effect is the creative expression of that feeling, to fully what we're feeling into our body. And that's where the magic happens in the brain, in terms of why connecting with rhythm and utilizing rhythm is having more of an impact than sitting there and listening to it as a passive activity, which is great too. I mean, amazing things are happening in that context, but I'm not a music therapist and I don't pretend to be one. So I'm not going to speak too much to what's going on there in terms of music as just listening and enjoying it. But we know that our brain processes music differently than any other information, and it's processed in a different part of the brain, so it's retained differently. So there's absolutely therapeutic benefits there. But speaking specifically to rhythm and what we've lost in our relationship to it has more to do with like those blockages where we don't let ourselves be free in the moment to express ourselves, how we really.
So it's the output, the expression, and say a pre-made dance. So to say someone else made a dance, and then sure, that's great to learn someone's dance and to be able to recreate it, but still there wouldn't be that element that you're talking about, your personal expression.
Well, that's actually a really way to think about it, because when we're talking about the brain and why rhythm impacts it, we're talking about neuroplasticity, really. So essentially how the brain changes and adapts to our environment. And what's really amazing about now is that we have the science and the research that is actually starting to back up what the ancients have known for thousands of years, essentially. So people never stopped doing these things, and now we can say, here's why. So the brain is a lot more flexible than we previously thought. So when you are doing something like learning a dance, and you are creating new synaptic connections, so if we want to start talking a little bit about the science, so you've got your nerve cells or your neurons, right? So your synaptic connections are essentially that highway through which information is transported. And so the more of those synaptic connections we have, the more efficient our brain and just enhances our cognitive function overall. So activities that unfortunately modern society often engages in are degenerative or neurodegenerative, and can be risk factors for neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, like dementia, Alzheimer's, and activities like watching TV, passively searching the internet, or just sedentary behaviors that are not really engaging are not good for creating new connections. So if you were to do an activity, for example, learning more, even if it's not you, and you pull up YouTube and you find some groovy new dance move you want to learn, even the process of learning that new skill is going to have a positive impact on your synaptic count. So even if you're not good at it, it doesn't matter. It's just the very act of trying. It's the very act of challenging your brain. And what's really, and this is what's so unique about drumming, is you are utilizing both sides of it, and you're utilizing your limbs. So the more movement that's in, the better. The more senses that you're engaged, you're going to have a cognitive boost and create even more of those connections. And then you start creating those with repetition, those neural pathways, even more. Now you're enhancing your memory, you're enhancing your critical thinking, your problem solving, or language skills. All of these are elements that get benefit from firing up the synaptic. Does that make sense?
So learning something that's already been created, yeah, it's helpful to follow.
I would say, from my personal experience of doing this work, there's absolutely value in learning what someone is teaching you to do, particularly if it's a new skill for you. So that would really speak to the cognitive piece. When we get into the piece, it's almost like you've got that foundation of creating these new pathways, right? So we'll take drumming as an example, since this is what we're talking about. I have seen so many students come through, and I will say I work primarily with adults in my classes. I've done programs for children as well, which is a whole different animal, but also different but the same. And the adults that come into my classes are often there for one reason, or very similar reasons, which is they want to feel more free. They want to feel looser. They want to get out of their head and get into their body. And so the classes that I've designed are not really becoming the best drummer you can be, or we're going to do traditional West African drum rhythms and that's it, and you're going to learn it, and that serves a place too. Those are wonderful programs too for folks that want to go that way. But I've learned through doing this work that people just want to relax and have fun in a space where they feel comfortable and safe to do that. And some of the feedback that I've gotten from people, I don't have to be afraid to make them. They struggle with it maybe a little bit. They're coming around, right? So I'm attempting to create space for them. So we will start a program. Say I'll teach a West African rhythm, and when I say a rhythm, it's a pattern of beats. I have my drum. Should I play one for you, real quick? Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
As a little visual.
Let's try it out.
Let's see what it sounds like. I'm not going to hit it as hard as I normally would, because I've done enough online drum sessions to know that doesn't work. So we've basically got two sounds. Can you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's say I was teaching this pattern. Okay, so that's a real simple pattern. However, we're going to add another pattern to that, so those two patterns will communicate. So if I were to teach that one pattern, and I'll break it down in a way that everybody can learn it, and then we take the other pattern and add it to it. So now we've got a class where one group is playing the one pattern, another group is playing the other pattern. So now we're talking about polyrhythmic music. And just listening to polyrhythmic music has a remarkable effect on the brain. But when you're trying to play something in conjunction with another pattern, you've got a couple things going on where you're trying to focus on what you're doing, but then you're also listening to what's going on, because drumming is so much about listening, of course, which is why it's such a connector. And so the brain is just firing away. You've got all of these synapses happening, synaptogenesis festival. So what people tell me is, as they're playing this music and they start to be comfortable with this new pattern that they've learned, and those, if we're going back to the science, those new pathways are really getting ingrained in there, because repetition is how we learn, repetition is how we get. Then what happens, they start to spark fatigue. So we're playing that one pattern, or in their body, they're feeling something else, right? So now they're wanting to kind of fill it in with a little bit more of else. And so one of the things that I focus on in my classes and workshops too is improvisational for that very purpose. So I give a foundation of, here's your go-tos. You can always go back to your downbeat, right? Your downbeat. And then you can fill it in and put yourself on the drum. And so when I talk to people like that, in terms of self-expression, that is where the creative piece that we're talking about, the synergistic effect, happens. So you've got your cognitive benefits happening surrounding the whole experience, and then it shows up as creative expression when you're not just following somebody else's beats, but you feel safe and free and connected enough to go ahead and create your own. So fun.
It's the synaptogenesis festival happening in the brain.
I just made that.
It sounds so amazing. What I'm also hearing from you is that there's synapton that's being that's out of a whole lot that's in these experiences. I also loved what you said, just how you putting yourself here's the beat, and now fill in the rest with.
Yeah.
I feel like I can see how some really special things could happen in that.
So the way I use the tools that I've learned as a facilitator, it becomes so much meeting people where they're at. So you, and I'm sure you can speak to this in your work. This is not about me being a drummer. It's not about me being and there are times where that could be a little challenging, because, I just want to play, right? But that's not the space for this. And I'm reminded of that when I see somebody tap into something that they didn't know was there, not only creatively, but it's usually rooted in a story that they've held onto their entire life and didn't realize it until they were able to express themselves rhythmically on the drum and realized what they've been holding back. Because typically when we're expressing ourselves creatively, whether it's art, whether it's dance, whether it's playing an instrument, it's usually because somewhere along the way, someone or something told us that we weren't good enough or shouldn't be doing that. And myself included, I remember thinking, I played the saxophone all elementary school and high school and college. And I was good. Like, I have tapes of myself. I'm like, man, I was good. And I thought about studying music, but I told them, I'm not good enough. I can't do that. For people who are really good. Nobody ever said that to me. Nobody ever said I wasn't good enough. But that did happen to some people, where they said, oh, you don't have any rhythm. Sit down. You can't dance. And then they took that and carried it around their entire lives until it showed up on the drum, and they lost it. And so you have that, lost it in a good way. They released it, we'll say. And so some of the populations that I work with in this capacity, when I am utilizing, for example, the HealthRhythms protocol, that's going to be a little bit different than, say, a recreational drum circle. So the therapy is still happening at a recreational drum circle. It's just not being guided through the therapeutic tools to create experience for folks who are maybe not self-selected to be at the therapeutic drum circle. Maybe it's training or a wellness program or something that they're told they have to go to. So sometimes you have that barrier of folks are like, so dumb, and then 5 minutes later they're all good. But what I love about that is you still get those magic moments where people have an awakening. And so the way the HealthRhythms protocol is set up, there's some talking involved. There's opportunities. There's sharing. Self-sharing, like it's not mandatory, but I'm always surprised. One, at how often and how the common ground shows up. Very relatable sharings. And third, I'm always surprised at the person that I thought would never share, right? And it reveals to me how I'm still making judgments sometimes when I walk into a situation and I see somebody. You kind of scan the room and you're like, all right, here are the participants that, especially with kids, you're like, that kid is potentially going to be, not really engaged in this. And then next thing you know, that kid is leading the pack or spilling his heart out to the rest of the group. So I think that, again, is where that synergy happens, where the physical aspects of what we're doing really trigger the aspect as a result of having that safe out and out.
It could be a lifelong story that held in, even whether they were aware of it.
And oftentimes, I think that's what happens is they're drawn to it, but they don't know why they're drawn to it.
I know you mentioned like they lose it. You said, I am curious though. I could imagine there being tears in these moments. That would make sense.
And I think that's why it's always important, particularly in the therapeutic environments, to start out our sessions by letting everybody know that what is shared here stays here. And I don't know, it's just those simple words of knowing that we're creating this space for all of us to be vulnerable. The environments, like a lot of the places that I go are confidential, where I can't share photos, I can't share who was there or what we did. So a lot of people don't understand or recognize, the power in this, because I can't tell them. Like, you have to experience it for yourself, in a sense. And one of the environments I got to do a drum circle was at a women's, and it had been on my list of populations to work because it would be powerful. And there are plenty of facilitators around the country or around the world who are working with prison populations. Unfortunately, resources in terms of, most of the time my work there is volunteer. I think I got more out of it in a lot of, or just as much, because you go into a situation that you've never been in before. And I made the decision to go into it with my eyes wide open, right? Just fully present, fully aware. And that is another benefit that we didn't get to, the list of benefits, is bringing you into the moment, right? And in doing that and in making that decision, and a lot of that has to do with that. Have you ever been to a prison before? This was my first time.
I never actually have.
Yeah, it was unique, and it was you walk in and there's all the security protocols you have to go through, and you get searched, and of course I had to do a background check before I got there. So you're already kind of like on high alert. I made the intention to continue with that and be fully present and listening and hearing everybody. And I was just not only completely in awe how good I felt in the moment of doing what my role there was to do, but just, being so well received by everybody, but also by the fact, this is what they told me, this is what blew me away. They're not allowed to move freely in prison. And this was a particular group of women that are in a therapeutic program, so they are accustomed to the group sharing format. But when it comes to their day-to-day life, they're not allowed to just start skipping. They're not allowed to break into dance. They're not allowed to just start doing some jumping jacks if their body feels like it needs it. They're not allowed to start singing or just running around. And I thought about that in terms of freedom of movement. And here I am coming in there telling them to sing if you wanna, to shout, to get up and shake it, to run around the circle. And of course, in this environment, they were free to do that because it was structured that way. But that blew me away. Like, can you imagine not having the opportunity to just move your body when you feel like moving it? So I started thinking as a gift and started to think about it to be, hey, I have the ability to move whenever I want to. I need to move it, And so to bring that to them was really powerful, and opened up a lot of stories, opened up a lot of sharing. And I was invited. I haven't been back yet, but I really would like to go back. But just knowing that hearing what they had to say about how powerful it was to take what they were feeling in their body and put it on the drum, and how it just changed their whole mindset was really quite remarkable.
This not being able to move, not allowed to move, it's really, I feel really sad hearing about that, because I know that one of the essential components of trauma is immobility and constricted, constrained. I can't move. I can't do anything. So then how amazing it is for them to get an experience with you. They are allowed to, and they can, and then for you to walk away and have great gratitude for every step that you in the world.
Try to. I have moments where I forget. And I will say, I have to, and the woman that brought me in there, she actually is part of a nonprofit, the name of which is escaping me right now. But she specifically started a movement arm of that nonprofit to bring movement for that precise purpose, work through the trauma and work through what we're storing in our bodies as trauma. And so she would do yoga and dance and different types of movement combined with music. It's really encouraging to see that those programs are out there and that they have big enough hearts and are motivated enough to continue to implement them. So that's really.
I know you mentioned a different population. Mentioned the people who are like, oh, I am not really into this. They're presented with a drum, and it's because it's what the organization or the company or whatever said. Which almost sounds like someone I don't need to express myself. I don't need healing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way.
I wonder what you see out there as maybe it's misconceptions that people have of drumming, movement, and music, and how powerful it can be.
Yeah.
And that goes back to those talking about what is this that's getting in the way for people?
I would say, like many, front and center is, and what I hear mostly in my work is when people do verbalize it, and I can also pick up on body language. I think my background of being a photographer kind of gave me this observational eye where I can really take in a room. And so you can see, if they're sitting back in their chair, they're not connecting with the drum. Most people will come in and be like, oh, and I have to tell them not to hit it, until we get started. But then there are other folks that are just like, whatever. So I think it starts out with fear of not being good enough for this game, or is it fear of looking silly, fear of making mistakes? I don't get a whole lot in the work that I do, a whole lot of digging at facts. So much of what we do is focused on positive psychology. In other words, find the things that we do, the positives, and how we want to bring more of that into our lives. And that may involve the individual or reflecting openly about some of the bad patterns or some of the bad experiences, some of the bad and how that has been where they feel they are now. However, we're going to emphasize the positive things. So this is particularly important when we're working with folks who are in recovery. What makes a good, what are the characteristics of a good friend? And then we'll talk about what those things are. And then we'll come up with rhythms to put that on the drum. And so when we take that information and put it on the drum, it is creating the repetition that we talked about earlier. And it's also creating support because we're all doing it together. So fear is a big blocker that takes, as you know, a million different. And so folks who are maybe a little bit snarky about it, oh, this is dumb, just a bunch of hippies drumming around a fire, that's a big misconception that we get in terms of drumming. And that does happen. However, part of that, I think, is folks that don't feel included. And one of the intentions with my events, my recreational events, my private events, is to really establish a spirit of inclusion, that anybody can do this, despite musical background, despite experience, no skill required. If you have a heartbeat, you can drum, and I really hammer that in. And so those folks that might be resistant, I will observe their interaction and their personality. And if I see a little glimpse of, oh, I can play with this person a little bit. This person has a sense of humor. This person wants to participate, but might be a little bit afraid. And we've all seen this with kids too, right? Like the kids that even the negative attention is good attention, right? So when I see somebody that I can see that they're resistant, but they also kind of want me to call on them, I might call them out to help me with a task, like maybe be my beat keeper, for example, which is a very important role. So if I notice that they are actually pretty adept at what we're doing here, I might call them over and say, hey, or give them a drumstick or give them another tool to be kind of my sidekick. And oftentimes that's really where, they take on, this is some pride, and that empowers them. It's a positive association. And then they are then getting another level of healing out of that experience, right? And then there's other folks that you watch them and you think, okay, well, they're just going to go through the motions, and that's totally fine. And they're not being disruptive. They're not making fun of anybody else. They're just doing the bare minimum to get through this experience. And you have to respect that too, because that's layered. It's not my job to peel back. But this could be the initial trigger for them to kind of do some self-examination. Why did that bother me so much, or whatever? And what I see happen very often, particularly in recreational drum circles, is I will see people, like if we do it at a park, which is just an open event, and then I'll see people come up, kind of hang out outside the circle, and I'll watch them for a while, and maybe I'll run over and just say hi and hand them a shaker, which is just like a little egg shaker, which is a whole lot less intimidating than a big old drum like this. And so they'll say, oh, thanks, and they'll sit there for a minute. Next thing you know, they're shaking it, and they're grooving to the beat a little bit. And the next thing you know, I see them slowly walk into the center of the circle where I have all of my instruments, and they'll come in and take a little drum. And then it kind of builds and builds until they're sitting in the circle with their own drum, engaged with the group. And creating that pressure-free environment of, hey, you do you. Where nobody is trying to be a rock star here. This is not about being the best. This is about being together. And we're all contributing something. And if you've got something to say and you want to say it through your instrument or your body, then you're welcome to say it. So if not, you're welcome to just sit back and listen. I think that is what I've experienced as part of my role, is to really be able to meet people where they're at so that they can get the best experience.
I feel like there are so many lessons, and there's so many ways in which what you're talking about, of how you facilitate these experiences, are directly relatable. Every area of life as being something helpful, a helpful way of approaching life and going through. Like you're talking about a drum circle. These concepts and these ways of approaching it are so. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we've just scratched the surface of everything that you have to share.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, let's do this again. Have you come back and because it really does a tiny bit of all that you could have shared with me.
Yeah, and it's funny, in preparing for our talk today, I gathered thoughts and just trying to think, okay, well, obviously we can't talk about all of it in an hour, so we want to center it. But I think that the two biggest pieces for me that I would like people to walk away with is, if you engage in an activity, whether it be drumming or dance or something where you're utilizing rhythm and movement, if you feel amazing afterwards, that's not an accident. And letting folks know that there is something actually physiologically going on in your brain that's making you healthier. And just, if I could have everybody experience a drum circle in order to feel that, I mean, that's really my mission, right? I really want everybody to do that. And just to your point about the experiences, one of the biggest things I hear from folks in drumming being a catalyst to another area of their life is people who come to my drum circle by themselves oftentimes. And we're talking mostly folks who are, I want to say, in the over 40 age. Whether they're lonely, whether they're just looking for connection, whether they're just wanting to try something new. I've heard multiple times that just the very act of joining into that circle, feeling the feel good included and part of something, actually empowered them to another act of bravery in their daily life. I mean, what more can I ask for? Really, if our little drum circle gave you the courage to go do something that you wanted to do that you didn't think you could do, my work here is done.
It makes so much sense that would be the case. Even just the safety feeling, the feeling like that would be it'd increase your capacity for whatever challenge. Last couple of questions. One, for someone who's not ready to go to your drum circle, so like it seems experience anything in this realm, you have to show up. But I'm wondering, what can someone do to open up themselves? How can is there something they can try out by themselves?
I would, if it's something they want to do completely on their own, to maybe just get in that space of feeling a little bit familiar. Something as simple as listening to highly percussive music, some like Latin music, even, of course, African music. And particularly with the intention to see how it makes you feel. And I say that because I've listened to that music for as long as I can remember. And so sometimes it's like jungle music. It's when I say jungle, it's that just primitive, tribal, the drum, the shakers, all of the working and as the backbone, but then also as the star of the music. That always comes to mind when I think about just that kind of tapping into that, because we all have those moments where you just want to beat on your chest, go crazy, and listening to that kind of music can really ignite something in you that you may not know, or it could even just be traditional African music, but something that is really drum and percussion heavy. Just to familiarize yourself with that feeling of multiple percussion elements happening simultaneously and sitting back with it and just seeing what happens in your body. And, this is what I encourage people to do when they come to our drum circles too, because I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes where they feel like they have to start playing when everybody's playing. No, you play when you feel like you've got something to say. And that could be as simple as the downbeat, just to get yourself connected to the rest of the group. So sitting back and closing your eyes and removing that one sense to hone in on the other senses can be a really powerful way to familiarize yourself with that music in preparation for attending an event that is obviously percussion based.
I'll get some recommendations from you that I did in the show notes for people to. Lastly, where can people online?
Yeah, Soulshine Rhythm, and that's SOUL Shine Rhythm.com is my website. And so I'll just give you that one spot because that'll link you to all the other spots. So I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, and of course I have a newsletter, but all of that can be found through So I do events all over the Australia, and I do my absolute best to keep them all updated on the website. People actually want to come. So we keep it going.
It's a monthly circle that you do?
Yeah, so the monthly community circle is in Cedar Park, and that's the fourth Saturday, Shine Rhythm Circle. So we've been doing that circle every month for 4 years. And I just think that's amazing. That in and of itself, that people keep coming, it keeps growing. And lots of beautiful things have been born out of it, including marriages and business relationships and friendships. I met my husband at my own drum circle. So
wow, that's amazing.
Isn't that cool? It's one of my favorite stories. It almost feels made up, but it's actually true. And the drum really brought us, common ground. The drum is what brought us 27. And we, like I said, we're doing it in, one of my priorities is always to make everybody feel well in the space. So based on current provisions and things that people need to do to make themselves feel, that is all going to be taken into consideration. So if you want more details on that, you can find it on the website.
Awesome. soulshinerhythm.com.
That's right.
I'm so thankful to have connected with you, and also so thankful that you are providing what you are to the community and to each individual who shows up for drum and rhythm spaces for the future and all the more amazing moments that are for everyone who gets involved.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex, for reaching out and inviting me to talk about and having the understanding of its importance. And I love that you're exploring all these different alternative approaches to wellness.